So welcome to the Addressing Burnout Foundations course webinar. I am Kate. I am the Burnout Lady. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. Jane is our tech host. We've got 10 people on our list to attend. So we have a few latecomers. We'll let them in up to a certain point. Jane can do that for us. If you have any questions about accessing or needing to step away, just put it in the chat. This webinar is all about burnout, and I'll go through what the outline is. We'll be talking a lot about why burnout has become such a big topic and how it affects people. I'll be giving you information about what burnout technically is or where it came from in the literature. A bit about my story, where I come from, how I came to be the Burnout Lady. We're going to look at the patterns behind burnout, which actually extend beyond work, which is one of the key things I do, possibly a bit different to other material on burnout, is I'm very much focused on the interrelationship between our work and our non-work. It's not just a work issue. It's also about all the other things going on in our lives. The course, the Addressing Burnout Foundations course, is based on what I call the Addressing Burnout Framework, which is a framework that is applicable to individuals, so people that actually want to go through their own process of inquiry and matching the things that are burning them out to the solutions that will best work for them. And it also can expand out into a team or an organisation so that we can facilitate team discussions about workplaces or not-for-profits or groups where you might have some really strong themes coming through on causes of burnout that you want to discuss in a team context, and then to take it back to your own, what does that personal reflective practice, like what does that actually mean for everybody in the team to do privately in a more private way. I'll give a case study of working through a sort of burnout scenario with somebody, and we'll have some time for Q&A. I'll go through now the definitions. This is taken from the work of Christina Maslach, who is one of the more famous names associated with burnout. There's also Dr. Freudenberger, who was in the 1970s. This came about working with nurses. So it was something that was coined, a term within the context of nursing, healthcare profession. And the definitions, Christina then came shortly after and put these definitions or three components to burnout to distinguish it from things like chronic tiredness, possible mental health conditions or mental health stress, and also things like maybe just sort of looking at what might be just due to the environment or what's actually going on for the person. Like, how's the person experiencing the situation with their work? So first we have exhaustion, which can be physical, mental, and emotional, like usually all of those, physical, mental, and emotional, but sometimes one more than the other. Now, cynicism and depersonalization, this refers to this sense of how it affects our thinking. So burnout actually switches off part of our connection to people. We start to think a bit more negatively. We're less likely to take actions that are proactive and can actually help us. We start to think that there's no point in making an effort. And we have less empathy, so that particularly bears out with people on frontline services or that have to give a lot and they just feel really disconnected, like they go from completely caring to not caring at all. That kind of emotional and mental effect of just being quite depleted and unable to really respond and understand what they're feeling in relation to some of these stresses. And irritability, just that lack of tolerance or being shorter with people or being snappy and frustration. The third dimensional component is around effectiveness, which can be called productivity in some of the literature, because employers have this focus on us workers, the workers being productive, and we do studies on the economy and productivity and things like that. The way that work with this part of the definition now is to really talk about people's effectiveness in matters that are important to them. So not everybody has a purpose-led job where they want to go and make a difference in the world. It might be more about having a good quality of life and a good job that allows them to have energy for their children when they come home from the day. Or it might be more about feeling like they're moving towards another goal in their life, but they want their work to give them enough purpose just to feel like that's supporting their lifestyle. We can also look here at the lack of motivation. This is often in systems where, having come from government history, I'll talk about my background in a second. The systems are so complex. When you try and improve things, you're trying to change things, you get caught up in red tape and paperwork or, people, relationships, dynamics in an organisation where you can't get what you want done. And it just gives that sort of moral depletion or that feeling of there's no point really trying and not feeling engaged or effective here. And we talk about it in a different kind of language. Obviously, we don't talk about research terms when we're talking day to day. We might say things like, we're just hanging in there. We might have this idea that everyone's in the same boat. So what's the point? We're all kind of in this together. There's no point trying to change it. And there's usually some kind of physical, like not feeling great physically, the sort of how it hits the body in some way. And when I work with people one-on-one, I really see that sense of hopelessness or despair that's just beneath the surface. It's like there's no real point in changing. I don't know what to do. It's like being a bit trapped. And sometimes when you offer suggestions, you might have experienced this where you're trying to help somebody that might be struggling and they just don't want to take on anything, or they don't want to have any sort of input from other people about how to deal with it better. So it becomes this very isolating experience where you kind of know you're not dealing that well, but you're not really able to reach out either. And also we're looking at gaps. I see these gaps in support systems. So support systems can be anything that kind of gives us that feeling of being supported in the world, and it might be quite specific things going on around money or housing, family stress. And there's often a couple of things where we just need a little bit of extra attention or resources, because burnout, one way of conceptualizing it is we've got more to do, or we've got more on our plate than what our resources are. So socially, we can look at what's going on in terms of the support systems of that person. That's what I find. Now, about me, how I came to be the burnout lady. As some of you know, I worked primarily as a government policy advisor in the EPA at the beginning, and then New South Wales Health, with a few projects in between on social housing, transport, urban planning, and Aboriginal communities. Now, in that time, I found that I was a very mission-orientated, a bit like Jane shared earlier. I got very attached to projects and I would give them everything, and then I would end up in a heap at the end of it. Not necessarily that effective in what I was actually trying to do, and feeling quite demoralised. Now, what ended up coming into my career was more personally, I had a small business doing energetic healing and looking at ancient medical knowledge, which was a little bit of a pet project for me when I was growing up and was quite sick as a child. So I always had these going to doctors and they could never work out what was wrong with me. I was sort of like sick children. And then going through drug and alcohol in my teens and rebellion. And then when I kind of got my act together a little bit, I started to be really fascinated with the body and different types of experiences. And I studied quite intensively for a few years in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic, which is an Indian medicine tradition. And I'm saying that because I use some of that in the way that I approach sort of energy management and burnout being partly about stress and how we look after ourselves. So I've got a certain filter which I also see things through from there. Now, what burned me out so much? Well, I had actually, before I go into that, my last project with government, inside government, was working for a department called Service to Business, which was part of Service New South Wales. And we were aiming to make business easier, like better for business to interact with government. We were doing surveys about red tape, about the different transactions that a business had to do, why businesses were suffering, whether the supports we were offering as a government matched what they actually need, sort of like user research, that kind of thing. And at the time, we were coming into the sort of what I call the disaster era. So in the late 2010s, I just enrolled in psychology and postgrad psychology, deciding I wanted to move away from policy. And we had the bushfires, COVID, and then floods in the northern regions, and a series of different programs that all got developed really quickly to deliver to small businesses. What came about from that was all the staff got very burnt out. We did something called the PMES score, which is a People Matters survey. So some organisations have some version of that where they ask their staff about how they're going, how engaged they are, how they feel about their work. The burnout scores were really, really high. And as a leadership group, we were brought in to say, okay, what are we going to do? We've got a bunch of burned out staff. What should we do? Going through the scores, all giving brainstorms into the picture. And what I found, being fresh with my psychology hat on now, I was not satisfied that we were actually addressing the system issues. So we had some quite fundamental disconnects in the organisation. So one of them was about digital products and everything going online. But then the customer service teams that I was working with and supporting had no idea what had just been launched online. And then all the customers would ring up with questions about the digital products, and they hadn't been briefed because the timeframes were so fast and we couldn't communicate. We couldn't work out how to keep people up to speed with all the change that was going on. So I wanted to get people into a room and actually talk about, hey, how's burnout different? If you're on the phone, burnout's very different as an experience if you're dealing with angry customers all day, you're going to need different things to help those people compared to the product guys, and usually they were guys, that are up writing code all night because some feature has to be changed overnight because we've got a new release. So burnout looked very different between all these different teams. So I wanted to be able to unpack that and give people an opportunity to talk about that. What that led to was the burnout program in Service New South Wales, which was rolled out to about 300 people and was very successful. It wasn't actually something I really knew that I was doing at the time, but it was just one of those things that evolved that way. And from a policy background, I really am very passionate about the social part of burnout, looking at the limitations of wellness initiatives. And if you're looking at sort of functions in organisations where you have someone doing HR or people and culture, you have someone doing work health and safety, you have someone doing learning and development, and then you've got the actual people managers that have to actually interact with the people. So those roles are all very connected in terms of being able to understand a job and the types of issues that someone might be having in relation to stress and burnout. The patterns behind burnout are things that are at the social, that I call sort of the meta trends. Now, these are not necessarily work or non-work, but they affect both areas. Why I like to use these is because there's a stigma. We know there's a stigma around anything mental health. Even though there's a lot more tolerance and interest and conversation these days about mental health, we still have this, it's hard for people to admit sometimes or share or get help about what's going on. When we talk about these big system issues that are going on, I find that people can really discuss it a bit more meaningfully and talk about how it's affecting them without necessarily zooming in right on them and what's going on for them personally. So first one in the mix is the digital dependency and how the degree to which screens, laptops, phones, devices now govern a lot of our lives, govern a lot of our social relationships. And this has been decades in the making. If we trace it back to smartphones and then into patterns at work where we had laptops where we could now be available off-site, to debates about returning to work after COVID because now everyone's sort of dispersed and fragmented. If you look at generational impacts and what's going on for younger people and how they can relate to going to work when they've been socialised and brought up online, those types of things, they're the conversations that can really, put a massive filter on how we understand burnout and what's going on. It's important to be able to look at how those patterns are affecting you. So next one is role overload. So this is loosely having too much to do versus your resources. It can be also role switching. So small businesses that I work with, and sometimes people that even with industries that have changed a lot, particularly managing staff with different needs or the different expectations on leaders and managers now. I mean, you're wearing lots of different hats. You can feel like a counsellor one moment, and then you're like doing operations, troubleshooting, and then you're advising on finance, and then you're trying to find a lawyer. Like this kind of merging now of roles that don't have really clear boundaries around them compared to, say, 20, 30 years ago. This is something that creates quite a lot of psychological stress in people, and it's really good to unpack it. Emotional labour, so this closely paired with the term compassion fatigue. This is for carers, particularly, or service industry people that give and give and give, or similarly people that might go home after work and have a young family or teenagers to look after and absent, single parenting, all those types of things where we're giving, we've got that feeling of always having to give, and the culture of having to not let people down. Instability, uncertainty. Here we're talking about organisational restructures. So there's changes from your industry, disruptions to major clients, or unclear expectations around how roles are changing. The most recent one being AI and how it's changing how we work and how, the job insecurity that's brought in. And finally, cultural and social norms, which it's not just about pushing through and working harder and this kind of our definitions of success by default, but it's also about the sort of social role, the future of work. So working with Gen Z, so the burnout is actually highest in the research 18 to 29-year-olds, which is quite interesting if you think about work. They barely got into the workforce, but that's actually the highest age group. So looking at what's going on for different types of, social groups as well. Now, the framework, the point of having a framework is to provide an overarching umbrella that can describe all the different things going on that are just these patterns, but also bring it into a practical application and show the logic or the way that all the different parts relate, hence framework. Now, what's important to note, burnout is a continuum. You don't just end up burned out and then you're just not burned out. You enter into it through a series of stages. Now, what you might see mostly is us in the middle, is the big middle in the curve. A lot of us are in that. We're burnt out, but we're okay. We're still doing okay. At the time of recording this, it's nearly Christmas. We just want to sort of get through the end of the year. So we're looking at maybe little improvements we might do, or we might just buckle down and go, hey, there's only one more week of work or whatever it might be for you. Or at the time you're listening to the recording, you'll notice that you'll be in a certain phase of that feeling really great, usually after a holiday, which is when you're looking at more prevention or you're looking at planning, and you might be looking at the year in January and going, what happened last year? What can we do differently this year? And getting really clear on what you're going to need when you get those periods of stress and peak periods or different issues that maybe you had to put under the carpet at other times. And when you go into that amber, the middle zone, you're looking at that, okay, what can I do now? I'm not going to be able to fundamentally solve any of this, but let's just see what we can do. Sometimes it's more Band-Aids, but sometimes it's like really getting some good either mental health help or help from a certain person to get really clear on what's realistic. So you can actually match what you can do with what you've got in a more objective and supported way. And then with acute burnout, so the policy cycle, we'd have prevention, management, response. So response is really when things have got very bad to the point where you can't function anymore. So that's critical red zone burnout. That's people who say that no matter even if they go to sleep, they wake up tired. So it's usually got a very strong, like all the systems, the physiology in the body has had a knock, and it's usually been over several months. And we're looking at there, and the solutions there are different to the people in those other stages. So you have to customise and understand where people are at in that continuum. Now, when we look at both our work and our professional lives, which the course focuses on both, so you can actually, the worksheets in the course, you can actually have a look at what is it at work that are the things. If you had to name one or two things, or, you might even have like very clear things you already know about, or you might have things you're like, I don't know, I'm just a bit flatlined and I'm not enjoying this and I don't know what's going on. But it gives you the prompts to kind of go, okay, how do I find out exactly what it is that's really creating this stress that over time leading to burnout? And similarly within our personal lives or other, we do have a standard set of things that can really affect us, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. Now, from looking at our patterns and getting clear on ourselves, I encourage people to look at the material, and the course is sold to individuals, so it is for people. But what comes about, the idea is that then they can take that to teams. They can take some of those exercises if they've identified system issues going on outside where they want to be able to influence more and be more proactive in shaping some of those issues in their team or work environment. And with the framework, the other benefit is it can be revisited. So you can do a quick run through this time, and then you might pick up a couple of things and come back in a couple of months and pick up a couple of completely different things. That allows things to change as our lives kind of move on. All right, any questions about things not being clear? Anything that's, mostly I want to make sure that you're understanding and following. There'll be questions at the end of the webinar in more detail, but just put up your hand if there's anything that's not making sense. So there's 4 parts in this framework. The first one is to make burnout personal and relevant. So we've got these terms, we've got all these discussions going on about burnout. We've got scores perhaps from our people. We know what's going on with us personally, but how do we actually see objectively what's going on and actually make it real and relevant so that we can then look at solutions that will fit that particular, we call it a burnout profile. So what's your profile of what burns you out or what the team burns out from? Now, personal, the fact is these are fairly intuitive. Jane, I just saw your hand raise. Do you want to?
Yes. So one of my patterns, being wildly ADHD, is I forget things. I learn things and then I forget them. So I'm wondering whether in a diary of how I'm going, because I can have like a horrendous week and then I have one good day and I've forgotten the bad week, which inside, then I, maybe.
Yeah, tracking. So not necessarily specific to ADHD. There's an emphasis here on like tracking ourselves. Like if we pick something, we're like a scientist or an innovator wants to test something. So with this type of thing for you, it's like, how do I actually track myself? Because I can't actually see what's going on. So I'll talk a bit more about that at the end. That does come under personal and to some extent genetics. lifestyle. So the personal attributes are things that make us, so that even things like our personality and temperament, what we like, what we don't like. Some might say introvert, extrovert, all those kind of dimensions. It might be around gender, might be that thing of what makes us us. And including in that, though, is our, our social situation. So, whether we're in a family, whether we have close friendships, anything that makes us, that will include or that will affect how burnout might present. The most common example I use here is people from non-English speaking backgrounds that dealing with a completely different culture and different expectations. And so that shapes their ability to ask for help and to name and articulate how they understand the problem and whether they're going to ask for help and who they're going to ask for, who they would reach out to and whether those kind of things. Now, the personal element here involves self-inquiry, and we go through the dimensions of social and emotional intelligence in one of the modules in the course, because we need to be able to track. So if we're saying no to, we're a caregiver that needs to sometimes say no to stop burning out, we'll need to know about what happens when we say no and how uncomfortable we can feel and the fears of letting people down and the sort of catastrophizing that might happen if we're not able to turn up in the same way. So building that awareness around emotional and social intelligence and being clear on what we're good at, because we all have some strengths in that area usually, and then those areas that can maybe be interfering with our ability to look after ourselves. Now, when we look at professional work, the dot points here under this heading are the things from the literature that affect burnout across the board, all industries, all types of people in a work context, okay? But workload and control sometimes called autonomy. Autonomy is actually the one seems to be studied a lot, or different innovation going on now really looks at giving people more autonomy and the benefits when people have a sense of control over their work. Some people don't want necessarily a whole lot of control, so that autonomy then could look like having really clear instructions and being able to act on them. So being able to understand how this shapes your experience of work and maybe being aware of differences in your teams where some people want to be told everything about what to do, some people don't want to be told anything, or even with yourself, how much you want to be able to instruct if you have staff, what kinds of things can be challenging for you. Now, reward is money, but it is also things like being rewards in the sense of feeling motivated, and it could be things like access to training, access to certain types of conversations and work that's intrinsically rewarding for you. We're looking at community and relationships, so the quality of our work relationships and what kinds of impact that can have. Some people like to socialise a lot at work. Other people do not want a bar of it and just want to go home. So you're looking at the variation that can happen. So when you're looking at what helps people, you're just being aware that there's these spectrums of differences that we're working with. And fairness and values, lastly, with those dimensions, it's a lot about decisions being made. When you see a decision being made that you don't agree with work, that can really affect people. It could be something, a bit of a moral conflict with them that comes up around what an organisation is doing that doesn't match their values. Or it can be conversely, it can be something when they feel really aligned to what's going on in the work and it matches really well with their values. It actually protects people from burnout. It actually helps people to feel that they're kind of congruent in themselves, that they're working in an organisation that gives them a good pride of achievement. So I mentioned the continuum stages earlier, and this is part of making it personal and relevant, understanding where you're at in the cycle, and for teams, managing across a period of time. At the moment, we're more in response. We're in at the end of the year. A lot of us are more in the red zone of feeling very tired and ready for the year to end. Early next year, we'll be more likely in a more looking forward planning kind of space. Now, stress and the nervous system, one definition of burnout is unmanaged stress. So over time, typically over a few months is the time span most often given to show how the body will naturally be good at dealing with stress, but up to a point, and then it just can't anymore. And understanding there's a physiology that's built into that system that's actually helping or trying to support us and giving us messages about what we need. So when we're looking at this part of the framework, we're mapping the different stresses, what stresses us out. We just went through that profile and understanding what that is. And then looking at the physiology that comes about from that. So we refer to the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, and how for different people we might go into different types of responses that then, if we can track that, so Jane, I guess with ADHD, there can be a freeze and a bit of a flight, or there can be different responses where we're just aware that we're not paying attention, and I'm speaking as a fellow ADHD, So we're aware we're not paying attention, or we need to be more aware of tracking certain things. And then that becomes really important, because if we don't, we get more stressed out. We lose sense of what's happening, and it's harder to retain sort of continuity. I think it's a big piece around continuity and the stress of the disruptions in your attention. We have this beautiful inbuilt physiology in our body that allows us to recover when we allow it to. The actions in the course and that I work with people are those that can be very short periods of time, but that will actually trigger off those inbuilt recovery mechanisms. So it's not this sense of, oh, now I've got to go and recover from burnout like it's another thing on your to-do list. It's really bite-sized, integrating things into the day. And this stresses the nervous system. We're looking at this also in the context of social relationships and what we know about when you have social supports, your health outcomes, all other things equal, you get better health outcomes. People that might lose a partner, or the different things we go through socially where we're isolated or alienated, we are more prone to illness. Our illnesses will last longer, and there's less recovery on the general level. Okay. This is a good visual, this one, because this is a depiction of what happens when we're under chronic stress, or how chronic stress actually happens and kind of sets in. And the idea here is we need a certain amount of stress. Stress isn't good or bad. It's just something that kicks our motor, like having a car, turning on the engine. We need a bit to move forward. And there's a happy zone where we're very engaged. Now, if we're in a purposeful challenge in this middle zone called mobilize in this chart, we're very aware and very kind of at that peak performance. It's where we can really enjoy that sense of being focused and engaged and having the resources to deal with it and being able to fulfill and follow through. What can happen, though, is if the stress keeps going, we'll go into more of a freeze response. And I gave an example recently with someone who runs a childcare provider, and she was like very amazingly accomplished leader, just running 30 childcare centres across the country, like amazing. And I was like, what would be the thing that would get her into the immobilisation? And what I came up with was road closures. So something you cannot control, and the system you just cannot, it's beyond your ability. You haven't planned for it, you don't know about it, and you don't have, normally you're so good at managing everything, but having a whole lot of children stuck in facilities without food and their parents can't get to them. So there's situations where we really freeze because we know we can't actually deal with it, and it's actually a natural response, you might have seen if you watch animal movies, but a deer will freeze and wait because it sort of plays dead, and it kind of waits for the prey to pass. If the prey thinks it's dead, it's not. It's going to be safe. It's a very intelligent mechanism in a way. And the other response we might have more here is this fight, this actually getting ready to fight. So we'll want to go back into that mobilize and fight energy. We'll try and take ourselves back when we think we can deal with it again. And what that means is we're creating all this adrenaline in our systems, which then over time affects how we think, because it shuts off the upper parts of our brain, our executive functioning, and then, introduces all the hormonal cascade of changes in the body and bracing and the eyes dilation, the blood flow, the breath, all these amazing physiology things get kicked off. What happens though is when we see the threat has subsided, chronic stress is chronic because we are still in the physiology space of the stress, and we don't ever really release the stress or calibrate back to our natural state. So an animal in the wild will shake, or if you've ever had a dog and you had to give it a bath and it goes crazy and it shakes, that's a natural nervous system response. If you're not conditioned socially to have to behave in a certain way, you will just naturally do what your physiology tells you to do. Trained hypervigilance is this state where we're always on. So we might sleep, but then still have a part of us thinking about work or something that goes on. We might be trying to relax with friends, but there's a part of us that's kind of ready for a phone call that something else is going on. There's this sense of always having to be on and not quite ever being able to fully drop into the body again. And the activities we go through in the course are about titrating, calibrating, regularly allowing the body to find that balance so that we can complete what we call the stress curve and go back into that natural zone. Now, deep rest and real rest, if I can focus on one takeaway for people here and people listening to this recording, one is going to be on this one, deep and real rest. The other one's going to be about the village of supports. They're the two things, if you're working with people, that I like to emphasize, particularly if I don't have a lot of time. Now, we think of rest, we've got a very a little bit of a skewed understanding of it, because rest can be time out watching Netflix. Rest can be going and eating way too much food. Things that just allow us to go into a different state and just kind of whatever we feel like doing, we follow the dopamine wherever it goes. And that, while sometimes that's fine in short, we do that. That's part of being a human. But it's not necessarily rest. And understanding that rest is actually, at the beginning, when I work with people, it's a little bit uncomfortable because it kind of doesn't feel like rest. They still have to be paying attention to their body. They might be moving in a different way. They're sort of almost like they're re-landing into themselves. And it's not necessarily a comfortable experience. So things like yoga, or if you have a practice you might already have where you've worked through that, you might have already created that as a really great way to land back into your body. But we are focusing here on what we can do to recalibrate when we have these things going on. Now, non-sleep deep rest, I am drawing on this work by, I think his name's Andrew Huberman, professor neuroscientist in Stanford. To be honest, he's really just coined this term because we have a cultural bias against Indians. We might have a cultural bias against things that sound Indian or foreign. A lot of the great, and as I mentioned earlier when I talked about who I am and my story, I've learned a lot about these alternative complementary medicine practices. And we do have a lot of them popularized in culture, but the actual ones that work on these ones are like almost being asleep but not being asleep. And they have been researched to mirror the benefits of sleep in terms of resetting the dopamine pathways, in terms of affecting the immune system, slowing down our heart rate, increasing heart rate variability, which is like our capacitor in our heart to deal with stresses. And there are things like alternate nostril breathing. Some of you on the call might know these, or the yoga nidra, which is like a deep hypnosis practice. And you're going into a very deep restorative state that can be really quite manageable in a work day. It might be a 5-minute exercise. It might be a 10-minute or a 20-minute exercise. What those exercises do is they're both energizing and relaxing, which is a funny paradox for if we have a Western mind. We tend to think in one or the other. You go to the gym and then you relax, or you drink and then you relax. Practices like this actually will reduce energy when there's too much in the system and increase energy where there's not enough in the system. So that's what makes it so powerful, is that we don't actually have to think about it or try. It actually just does that. The exercise or activities I've got listed here are the ones that are pretty well known to have this effect. So this is diaphragmatic breathing, sometimes called abdominal or belly breathing. Anything with the breathing, because the breathing affects our physiology so quickly. It's the number one thing we can do to be aware of our internal physiology and to change it. Tai Chi and Qigong, again, these are practices that work on all the energy systems in the body. Slow movement, and move the lymph. They can open up the joints, so addressing things like postural strength if you're sitting at desks all day, or even with screens and our heads down like this, like opening up the shoulders. You're looking at focusing on the joints and the health benefits that come from improving that circulation all through the body. Now, walking, I mentioned the slow version and the fast version. In the course, we actually look at the things that set off what's called our dorsal nervous system, our shutdown response. So this is like when you're so tired and you can barely move, and working with people in chronic fatigue, people with very deep set fatigue. It's like a little hack where if you encourage them to go for a very short walk, it actually gives them energy. So you might think, I just need more sleep, but actually that to a point that won't, but you'll always need more sleep. You actually need to do something that just triggers off the nervous system to feel safe again, because there's a deep shutdown going on. Now, conversely, if you've got a big meeting and you're like anxious and you just need to get out some energy, going for a really fast walk would be much more beneficial. So we can see how we're always playing with this, like systems, like a dial, like where do we need a bit more energy, where do we need a bit less? How can we balance it? How can we allow this system to reboot itself? I've mentioned nature and immersion. Acute burnout, the best recipe is to put someone in nature, in a forest somewhere. In Aboriginal culture, they'll just leave you under a tree for a day and come and get you. It's been said, it's flippant, joking to some extent, but it's just so powerful and well known that in those other cultures that those practices are the things that will actually bring us back into balance. And even if we can't, the whole day building and sitting by the ocean and just watching it, doing nothing, these types of things where we're just immersed in the environment. And humming actually has some research backing it around activating the parasympathetic nervous system as well. So that one's in there. Third part of the framework is about state management. So our state is a term mostly used by athletes and performance coaches. It's the combined effect of our feelings and our thoughts and our situational awareness, our awareness of our body, our physiology, and the environment. For ADHD, and just because we've got 2 people right now on this call with ADHD, me being one of them, we're very environmentally sensitive. So our ability to concentrate, to focus, can be very affected by environments, which means we can either vary a bit more than the average person from not being able to function at all in a very bad environment to being absolutely genius in other environments. So part of neurodiversity can be about looking at what environments we need to function well in. And if that can be things that brings in like tracking yourself or being able to, for me, I do my tracking at the beginning of the day and the end of the day in the quiet on my couch with the cats. That's what I do because I know that I will lose focus during the day and I need to have somewhere I can come back to at the end of the day. So I will manage a lot of my schedule to make sure I have those bookends on the day at the beginning and the end. So if I can't follow something up, I'll just write it down and I look at it later in the week. Our state is a combination of our focus, our nervous system, and identity. Now, identity is a really interesting piece here. The course does go quite a bit into this because identity is the thing that can trip us up. Some people might associate it with ego, like a sense of having an ego or an idea of how things should be or being controlling, but it's more what really makes us feel threatened about who we are. The best example is political debates on social media, which I only ever look at sparingly, but you've probably seen examples where people get very attached to ideas or ideologies that have absolutely no impact on their current material life because it's hitting an identity. It might be something, a belief system that their family has had for generations, or it's hitting something else and something else going on. So in any number of causes out there at the moment in world politics, in whether it's issues around justice and rights, environmental movements, political parties, positions, all that thing, from being in policy for so long, I was always fascinated by how strongly these opinions people held and how that actually stopped discussions to some point. So if they wanted to collaborate with somebody or they found out something about someone, it would actually just affect everything about them. And we had that in COVID when I was doing these talks in COVID where I had people that had broken up friendships because of opinions about the vaccination. And that is part of how we're built, to have these opinions, and it's important to know what yourself and what you think about things. What comes up around state management, though, is how much can we be present and how much is our identity or these opinions wasting sort of emotions or making us ineffective and not thinking clearly about what's going on. So state management is much more about how do I actually set up my state, look at what I want to create in this situation. If I'm working on a project that I'm really passionate about, but I'm also passionate about going home and being able to host a dinner at my house or do something else, I need to manage my state all through the day to know that's my day and that I don't have energy to waste on getting upset with staff for things that I think are preventable. Whatever it is, there's just these like snares, and you call it shadow work in psychology. It's where these things come up that really can throw us. And being able to use those sort of state management, which come into really just relaxation, being able to track our body and relax and then think about the situation a bit differently, having that pause, which a lot of people talk about in the wellness space. The final component is called cultivating a village of supports. I refer here to some Indigenous approaches in Australian and Maori culture. There's a lot of focus on, tribes, and the saying in Maori, which is called Turanga Waiwai. Sorry, any Maori listeners listening to this, I will have butchered the term. But it's your place to stand. So this is this idea of when we're born, the parents look at the children and watch for the cues. They know the child's been there with a gift. It's come with a gift. It's meant to do this thing, which can be its work, its life's work. In other cultures, it's not called a job title. It might be the storyteller or the healer or the builder. We know we come in with this and we really stand in that as a gift. And when we do that, we know we've got a gift to give others and they've got a gift for us. And when I talk to people about how this could apply. At first, it doesn't make any sense, but over time, it starts to really be a bit more like the world they would really like to live in. And I had a participant yesterday talk about the Smurfs. Apparently, if anyone on the call knows the Smurfs, the cartoon growing up in the 80s in Australia, they all had roles. And looking at the sort of bringing that role overload that I mentioned earlier in systems, being really clear on what our role is. And that's not necessarily a bunch of tasks or things that are expectations from other people. Now, with clinical psychology tools, we look at something called the ring theory of support, which was a tool developed by a clinical psychologist around grief support, which has really good parallels with trauma-informed care and burnout. Because what it does is you map out literally with a bullseye ring, put your center, the person that needs support's at the center of the ring, and they draw the concentric circles around the ring, and they look at what their support system currently looks like. So they might have their GP and their best friend and their support group and their soccer club and their gym, whatever it is, their children, their husband, their girlfriend, whatever. And then we have a conversation about what it is what's the reciprocity there? So what do you give them? What do you receive from them? How do you feel about that? Like, is that meeting the needs and what's left over? Because we don't want to be putting everything onto a partner or everything onto our child. We want to be looking at, if there's things going on within that village, how do we get some other village members on board? How do we actually expand our idea of support within this whole system? And there are some guidelines and principles that really help that exercise. And it can be things really where people just need one or two things in practice that really gives them that sense of being more supported. The other great thing about the village is we don't have to look at burnout like a personal failing or something we have to fix. It changes the lens so that we can all talk about it a bit more collectively and proactively and sort of be the change. And it's a saying that it's a little bit cheesy, be the change you want to see in the world. But we want to look at what we can do if we're looking at making systems more regenerative and being collaborative and pushing insights maybe into leadership, or if we want to advocate for more money as a not-for-profit. We want to be coming together and looking at what the system needs to fulfill the vision of the organisation or the team. So it really helps people to take it outside of, if they did more, then that they need to do more. They need to keep trying harder, and getting an idea of who else is in your village and what are their strengths. And maybe the conversations might be, you might have quite different people where you're sort of surfacing that people have different motivations, but you're still allowing there to be that sort of intention of supporting a wider collective good. Now, I put that question there for the discussion sections because I think it's a really important one. I'd love to hear from people about what their idea of a support system is in a work environment or broader, but up to you. Now, I'll just go through a case study now of working with somebody. What I want to highlight in the case study is how we're shifting the thinking around burnout. So burnout in the original definition is the exhaustion, it's that negativity or cynicism, and it's that lack of effectiveness. So we want to change how we're thinking about those things so that we know what actions are going to work and then see how that creates a change, right? So Nathan is a senior project manager, so managing lots of people, lots of different projects. I selected this because it's a fairly generic job description that maybe you can see something in it for you. Now, when talking to him, his primary focus is having more holidays, how to get more time off work, and how to get more money. And that is a very common thing. If you're talking to people, it can be hard even if you're leading teams and staff, and they want more money and they want more holidays. And you sort of want to do more than that, but that's the conversation, can kind of stop the conversation. So we kind of have to park that and put that on the side, because, I mean, you could say that often people might not really want that. Like, why? If it's something that's around money, sure, that might need to be looked at. But let's try and open up this and disentangle this, because we don't want to end up in thought patterns that just lead to nowhere. Like, okay, that's great, we can't do anything about that. So if we dig a little bit below the surface here with Nathan, and we're using the matrix, because that was his terminology at the time, the matrix meeting, dealing with staff that were resistant to change. So he was spending a lot of time with staff grievances or turnover, a lot of churn in the organisation, a lot of contractors, staff that weren't coming on board with the new directives from the leadership, and he needed to deliver. And if he didn't deliver, he was finding it very frustrating with staff that weren't supporting him. Because he was spending a lot of time and energy, so it was like an energy leakage for him. There was a lot of drain that was going on. He wasn't able to complete his flagship program. So what he really wanted to do, so it had this compounded effect. He couldn't actually get what he wanted to do. So all those things compounded to that burnout experience for somebody. It's usually takes a certain shape, has a certain feeling. But you can see how all those different experiences connect and make it difficult. Now, the treatment is around, firstly, the clarity of distinguishing what is it that's burning him out. It's not necessarily not having enough money or time. Looking at the lack of purpose and the lack of sense of accomplishment. Now, I mentioned earlier that some people might not have an accomplishment and be ambitious at work. And I've had some interesting feedback from people that are like, they're interested in burnout, but they're not ambitious. They're not learning. They don't want to necessarily go up the career ladder, etc. They want to learn how to have a good quality of life and manage their energy. But in this case, there was a couple of projects where he really wanted to get them across the line, and he was not doing himself favours in terms of how he was going about that. So there were some practices about letting go of fighting other people's battles, pulling back on that energy, monitoring through the tracking during the day of when he was getting pulled into other people's dramas, and then sitting with some discomfort that was the not being the person that fixes everything kind of experience. And then the shadow work, which is, I talked about the identity a couple of slides back. This was looking at what was going on underneath the surface. So this sort of facing the fear of going to the executives with the proposal was really quite a big deal for him. So it was, in a way, easier to stay in the froth and the foam of day-to-day ops than to actually look at some of those bigger issues and to deal with some of the fears that were coming up. So the outcomes, just briefly around better listening, which was, he was really not able to listen to his staff when I saw him. Like, he just didn't want to do what they said. And one of the things was like this, the negativity of like, they were negative, but it was also him sort of going, okay, I'm negative because I can't fix this. I can't fix what's going on, and how that was affecting him. And having that insight that, okay, he can just listen and not solve. And it's actually, that's what they wanted sometimes, a lot of times. Sometimes it's that emotional labour thing of we need support to be able to just listen to people and to learn how to not absorb it and think we've got to fix it. And then there was being more attentive to leadership. He wasn't actually listening to what was going on so that he could prepare those business cases. He needed to do pitches for these programs, and he wasn't really paying attention. He realised that in this process. And finally, there was some conversations about money, so unpacking what money meant as the holy grail and solution. Let's look at what really is going on. Why do you want more money? And what is maybe the longer term or the more strategic way of looking at that? So I'm just coming to a close now in terms of the part I just talked to you as the presenter on. The course is about looking at all these issues that I've just talked about systemically and holistically from both the work perspective and also allowing for what's going on in our non-work lives. When we do it individually, we can look at whatever comes up for us when we go through the worksheets, and some of the course has material I've encouraged you to share with others about, just so that it can help you get clarity and different perspectives on what's going on. And in an organisation, if you feel like it's a sort of high trust culture where you feel comfortable, you're able to sort of go ask other people about what might be going on for them. Now, it walks you through a step-by-step process to map out your burnout profile and then match the activities in terms of nervous system and interventions that would best have an effect, and looking at things that are really bite-sized, that can be 5 minutes, that can be very matched to literally how much time you have or the likely rollout of a day or a week of what's going on. In organisations or teams, you might come up with a profile of solutions there. People might vote on it, or people can do this process and then come to a meeting and discuss it. And you might vote on one or two things just in terms of how that framework can be expanded. Now, it's self-paced. You can do it by yourself or groups or partners. There's 7 modules, which videos and an audio, so it's mobile enabled, and it has worksheets to work through the material. Okay, that's my official end to the talk. And I think here I've just got, you will get a copy of the slides as well. We've got the emails of people registered for this call, and you'll get, this pack. So this will have the link to my business services and how to buy the course. The first point here is the Addressing Burnout Foundation course, which is through my website or directly through Thinkific. Jane, I can see your hand.
And my question about how where can I find more information about all the things to do with the course as an individual? And also, if I had a group of friends or got to a stage with 2X that I had colleagues that I wanted to run a workshop with, how would that work? Do you have like a process where you go through, you want to talk to, say, even if a friend of mine wants to run an in-house centre company, do you speak to her first, or like how would that even work?
Yeah, it's a bit like train the trainer, sounds like, isn't it? Like having other people that can go through, take their people through. At this point, because I've got about 10 workshops over the next few months, I'm going to do that before I come up with anything that might be delivered by somebody else. So I'm just doing the delivery for these.
Should be clear, to get you to come in-house and train somebody. Like, how did that work?
Oh, okay. At the moment, I don't offer the sort of training part of it. I'm not saying no one's ever mentioned that in this recently. So I'm like, okay, yeah, it is possible, because I think it'd be good to go through like some basics around the kind of concerns, the nature of their workforce, typical questions I ask when I do a pre-call before I go into a group. So what do they know about it? What kinds of things do they already have available for their staff? Have they done any surveys or screens, or what kind of anecdotes that they might have about things that are going on? And then we'll look at the generic outline and adapting that so that it can focus on a few different areas and the idea of what they really want to achieve from it. So sometimes it can be a debriefing, a bit like organisations have critical debriefs if you have a stressful incident. And sometimes it's more like responding to something that's going on and going, okay, how is everybody? Other times it's more of a planning session around like capabilities or with the leaders, so people that actually want to come together and discuss the leadership or the management issues rather than the sort of day-to-day experiences of staff. So
that sounds to me like you customise the content and the delivery to meet the needs of the organisation.
Yeah, and that's why it's me at the moment, Burnout Lady, but when I get more than I can do, when I hit that's all I can do, I have a couple of people that I'm sure would be able to do it too. Welcome to Reesma. Sorry if I'm not saying it correctly. The recording will be available. I can't remember when exactly you came in, but happy for you to introduce yourself if you feel like it. And say why you're here. Or just say pass if you don't want to.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for welcoming me. I'm here because I'm doing my PhD and now I'm on my third year, and it's just a lot of things going on. I'm not originally from this country, so I have a lot of things happening at home as well, and I have to manage those things. Yeah, and I don't know, I feel like maybe I am burnout or something, so I just want to get to know myself better and work on that just to be productive again.
Yeah. How long have you got to go, the PhD?
This is my third year. Yeah.
I can't remember how long they are. I don't know if that varies. Is it 4 years?
So it's 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm near to my submission.
Okay. Yeah. It's a very specific thing with that. It's a very specific thing that I'm sure like other people going through PhD programs would have stories to tell. But yeah, happy to, if you want, I have a booking call, like you can book 20 minutes and we can have a chat if you like. So anyone else on the call have comments on how did this material compare with maybe what you expected, or was there anything that surprised you, that stood out?
Kate, this is the first time I've ever heard, you've mentioned it passing and tangentially, but this is the first time I've ever heard you talk about it in detail, and it's really, to me, it's really quite exciting because I do have a pattern of burning out and falling to pieces, and it takes me longer to get back together than I spent in the past.
Yeah,
it's burnout.
About in the Beyond Blue survey, it says half of people at any given point are burned out. It's the Australian survey. The PayPal survey that talks about small business and different business issues, and it's a lot around this sort of isolation, not feeling supported. Some of that is related to those sort of social change and the expectations. It can be things like business disruption and AI. It can be things like losing a major client. It can be stuff like your organization's just been taken over by another funder or something. There's things that just happen, but they seem to be just happening at a quickening pace. We get over one thing and then there's another thing. Change fatigue. Mel, was there anything that you could sort of see as beneficial for your people in that material?
I think it was all quite good. I think, as we spoke about the other day, for us, it's that fatigue of either giving the same advice over and over or having to tell people that we can't support them just because we don't have the funding or because they earn that little bit too much or because we can give them a one-off advice session but not actually take their case through any further. So, I think quite a bit of what you are set out to cover and what you cover in the course is really gonna hit hard with the team. It'll be good.
Yeah. It's funny to think about compartmentalizing because there's, to some extent, sometimes in psychology and mental health, it's a bad thing, like you're sort of separating everything into groups. But with things like this and sort of care of fatigue or not being able to help people and knowing there's just an unending need that you can't meet, this idea of having very clear kind of compartments that we actually have to use our thinking a bit on the job. Like we have to sort of change a little bit how we think when that situation is coming up. But it's also sort of looking at what are we actually providing that we might not realise because we don't have the shiny prize or the answer, but we're providing something. So sometimes helping people to really articulate the value that they are giving even when they can't give what they want or wish they could.
This is going to sound really odd, but I actually think it's going to be particularly pertinent to our management team included. But, we have certain staff members who we look at and we go, oh, they're just not pulling their weight or they just don't seem to be attending this thing or doing this thing. And when we actually break down the numbers, they're all doing their work.
Yeah.
But then we all have different expectations of, but this person actually puts their boundaries up and says, I can't attend this out of hours event because past my capacity. Yeah. Whereas we have other people who maybe aren't getting as much done in the day-to-day actual job description, but then they're out there at events for us, sending it out into community, they're always going to show up. And being a small team, we need all those things.
Yeah.
Those skills. And I'm not sure that as management, we always recognize them all in the same way. We just get a bit frustrated. Oh, you're not doing this or you're not doing that. And what are you doing that? Do we turn up to everything and do everything? And then it's like, so I think it's going to be really good. I'm excited.
Cool.
And this has just given me a bit more understanding of what we'll be going through and why it is fit for us, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the January workshops, they'll be
hopefully rested.
Yeah. It's a different, right now it's funny to give some talks at this time of year because people just look shattered. Just so shattered. And managing states, though, in terms of Christmas, and you don't want to end up in a heap on Christmas Day, right? So I'm kind of just trying to help people to be a bit more to scale down some expectations and also to just look after their energy day to day, to not try and sort of plan out next week or things don't get done or this sort of letting go of what we think we should have done by now. And
I may have suggested this morning, I was like, I haven't actually managed to clean out my inbox for the last 6 weeks. And as you know, I've missed a lot of emails. Caden needed reminders that I haven't replied to people.
Yeah.
And I said, is the best way for me just to make an archive folder and just to move everything in there that says all the things one didn't action in 2025.
Yeah. Leftovers.
Okay.
25 leftovers, yeah.
Date for next year. Ignore button. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit of a screen on is there anything? What are the consequences? You're just what's the consequences? Is there anything?
It harass me and I finally get round to it. Other than that, hopefully nothing too major.
Yeah.
I miss out on great trainings and things by not clicking on all.
Yeah. Well, there's a diminishing returns, right, with that? How many things can you go to and enjoy and actually be present for?
Yeah.
How about you? And did you have any questions or comments or feedback?
No, I think for us, Mel's last comments have been really, very similar to Guide Dogs. Our leadership team or our executive leadership team and senior leaders, I think, would benefit from something like this as well because of what and we do the pulse surveys and our staff surveys. The other thing that we aren't good at is change management, and that causes a lot of stress and discomfort to team members. And being providing a disability service, we also have a lot of team members who do have a disability. So it becomes quite triggering sometimes for them to be always having to explain why they might do something one way, because that's the way that they need to do it. Or we're very good at the visual stuff, so we understand low vision and blindness really well, but the other hidden disabilities are a challenge for us. But no, really insightful and something that I can definitely look at to include in our wellbeing plan next year.
Right. So what can I ask then, just as a quote, what do you think of those sort of social, did they resonate, the social, so I mentioned the digital lifestyle, the role overload, just my memory, instability, restructures, changing norms, like did they resonate as what we hear about burnout and the increase? Does that, I can bring up the slides if that's something you'll remember.
I was particularly interested. I took a screenshot of the shared, that graph.
That one?
Yeah. And thinking about effective activities that will keep me more in the mobilised.
Yeah.
That somehow setting up boundaries or indicators of when I'm going in.
Yeah.
Burnout.
I mean, us ADH people use a lot of calendars and times. We have to use a bit more tools than others. It's things visual because we're so affected by environmental cues. So having time zones in the day when it's sort of deep work or when you're going to energize yourself, even if you feel flat. So sometimes I find I'm not necessarily feeling like doing it when my peak function brain period is. And reason I think this is the same for the uni students. When is the best time of you to do your best work? And then how do you protect having some downtime? Maybe it's not enough. Maybe it's not as much as you want. But how do you have enough, a few hours a day, a couple of hours a day, and we can be more prone to devices and screen time? The dopamine fix of the algorithms that we all know about with social media, because we're depleted, we're more prone to just go down a YouTube rabbit hole and watch something that feels like entertainment, but really you think, but protecting time, that's my main point, is protecting, having time zones where you're really clear on. And then for me, I have to let go. If it doesn't happen in that time zone, or I do it, but it's not finished, and I have to protect my regeneration time, it's really hard. I want to stay and keep finishing something. And that's a discernment. That's a moment-to-moment decision. Do I really need to finish it now? What if I don't finish it now? Am I just avoiding it? Is it just making me uncomfortable? What happens if I did 5 minutes? Am I clear when I come back at my desk what I've got to do? Have I communicated to my team? Because sometimes I used to just forget to tell people things because so much is changing. You have to tell everything. With emails, could be, in a way, it draws you into email land. How do you manage times of the day when you have emails? These are the things. But yeah, I think I was asking though about this one. This would be my hypothesis around why burnout's increasing across the board. Sorry, just wanted to see if you had any comments on that. AI and...
I think this is what comes into what we do. Say this, the emotional labour, that caregiving and the overload switching. We need you to be the face of us today at this thing, but actually we need you one-on-one with a client tomorrow.
Yeah.
We need you to be an educator. We need you to be... So, yeah, I don't know that they'll hit for everyone all the time, thankfully.
Yeah.
But any of those can really make it a bit of a struggle, right?
Mm.
And we also, I think you find in not-for-profit land and social justice in general, people are caregivers in their personal life as well. They're just that kind of person.
Yeah.
Whether that's to friends, to animals, to tiny humans, to whatever. I think if you're drawn to those kind of roles, there's a reason for that, like a value, and you are probably slightly more prone to overwhelm. But
Yeah. And some would say you can be more exploited, or you're more sort of easier to manipulate if you're sort of looking a little bit nefarious. But you can be a bit like more prone. Like if you've got a worker that you know that just will take it, you'll do anything, that you'll just throw everything at them. Like employees have to look at psychological injury and things like psychosocial safety, and you have to go, well, hold on. Just because they can take it doesn't mean we should be actually giving it to them. Yeah, without a limit. Yeah. 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 Right. Well, if that's it, I'll wrap up there. The course is available now. It is on what's called a Thinkific platform. It's 57 American, which translates to, I think, 85 Australian. People signing up at this end of this year get a free consultation with me. So that's valued at a couple of $100 usually. And that will allow me to help you go through the course material, and that can be done later, but just it's for the purpose of booking end of year specials, etc. That's what's available. So